Welcome to week 3 of our Baggage and Treasures Lent course. This week we're asking if our fire has gone out. I'm standing here in the remains of St Mary's Church in Wimbledon. The building itself was gutted by a fire a couple of years ago, but fear not, we have plans to rebuild from the ground up. But why have I come here to shoot this week's video? Well, there is a tenuous link with the session. In previous weeks, we've looked at the treasures within the physical building itself, as well as looking at our worship and prayer life. But perhaps, if some of your churches are like some of ours here in West Norfolk, you may well have mentioned the physical temperature of the church, cold. But this week is not about the physical temperature, but the spiritual temperature. It's not about a physical fire like the one we suffered here, but a spiritual one. Is the church on fire for God? Perhaps the fire has gone out. Perhaps it needs stoking. And if we do need to lift the spiritual temperature, how do we do that? The 1990s was the decade of evangelism. One of the aims was to grow the regular Sunday worshipping attendance up from 9% of the population to 15% over those 10 years. Sadly, for many churches, attendance dropped over that time. And more recently, in some areas of our own diocese, we have seen church attendance drop to less than 3% of the population. And this was one of the drivers of the Changing Market Town project and the Ely 2025 strategy. For many, church attendance continues to decline, or at the very least, we are treading water. Perhaps we need to ask ourselves that question. Has our fire gone out? And if it has, how do we stoke it up again? A much younger version of myself once won a competition that was to spend a day at a steam railway museum and to have the opportunity to drive the train. The people I met that day were passionate about keeping those old iron horses alive. But it was heavy and costly work, maintaining and restoring all those vintage locomotives. A restored train, standing in the sidings of a railway museum, can be an object of beauty. People might travel for miles around to come and see the trains. But those trains, sitting in the sidings, can only come alive when the fire is roaring, and the pressure builds up, and that energy is converted into motion. Without the fire, they are lifeless, and those trains become destined to life as a stationary tourist attraction. That's much the same with churches. It costs a lot of money and a great deal of effort to simply keep the building open. But without the power and love of God at work in His people, the primary purpose of the building is lost. Is it time for the church to stoke the fire? Is it time for revival? And what do we need to do to begin that revival?